So next we are going to kind of shift gears a little bit. And we're gonna now think about sort of two different angles of source water protection and communications. We are going to hear from Emma White. She is with Emma White Research, and she worked with National Wildlife Foundation recently to conduct a survey of water utility operators to kind of get a handle on their opinions and attitudes about source water protection. And then following that, we are going to see a pre-recorded interview between myself and Ruth McCabe, who was unable to be here today. So talking about her work at an agricultural co-op and just providing some input and feedback to utilities, water utilities, on how to reach out to agricultural partners. So with that, I will turn it over to Emma. Thank you so much for being here today, Emma. And don't worry about the time. Go ahead and just take your full time. We are going to play catch up in the break. So don't feel like you need to cut anything short. All right?
Great. Thank you. This will not be terribly long. And I'm excited to, I was looking through this list of names, and I don't think any of you are people that I've talked to about this already, but this was a very, this was a small in scope little project with NWF. I really more qualitative than quantitative. I had a number of conversations with folks in Iowa who work at local water utilities. And some of them completed the questions online. Some of them most of them I talked to on the phone. And so we were able to have a little sort of back and forth about their thoughts on some of these issues, but this isn't, a scientific representative survey that will tell you 42% of water utility operators think X, right? This is a much more exploratory kind of project. But we talked to an interesting range of people here that ranged, to sort of some of the folks at smaller utilities was really, in charge of everything. There are 2 employees there. In other places we were able to talk to, one place I talked to the mayor, we talked to the plant operators. There's a whole range of different sorts of roles that folks had. Most of them have been working in this space for a pretty long time. All of them at least 6 years, and many of them more than 20. A lot of the folks that I talked to came from smaller communities. And many of them, and this I think affects some of the answers that they gave, almost all of them they're not reliant on surface water for the water that they're providing to the community. So some of the sets of challenges that they may be experiencing may be different from what some of you are seeing in other places. And we found here the people that we engaged in conversation had a pretty high level awareness of farm runoff, of runoff in general as a problem source for water quality. They brought this up themselves when we asked about the waterways in their area. They talked about soil runoff, nitrates, agricultural runoff, right? There's a pretty sort of came in with a pretty high level of awareness that this is causing issues. At the same time, a number of them said, we've made progress on a lot of things recently, right? We've been filtering, things have gotten better in various ways. But by and large, they mostly think runoff is a problem, is a at least somewhat serious problem. Even though, and this goes back to that they're not drawing from surface water, even though most of them say their own utility isn't particularly effective because they're drawing from alluvial wells or whatever it is that's not necessarily directly connected. We also wanted to understand awareness and perceptions about different actions that could be taken, different solutions. And so when we asked people themselves what kind of changes could be made to reduce this, people brought up a lot of different things. Buffer strips was the most common thing we heard, cover crops. But that was sort of readily came to mind. We also, I know this is a lot of words on a slide here, but we put a bunch of things in front of them, read to them or showed them online, different options. And here too, and asked them how much difference they thought this would make. The field buffers, those were the thing that nearly everybody agreed was going to make a big difference. Sort of fell off from there. Terraces were close behind. Sediment control structures, nutrient management, less perception when we got to tillage and other things between your cash crops. We also asked about, so that was all related to crops, and we also asked some questions related to changes around livestock management. And the thing that we saw the most would, the most perception that it would make a difference there was better storage and handling of manure, less awareness a little bit of things like, or less belief it would make a difference to exclude livestock access to water or to harden off or pave the congregation areas, but definitely a sense that the manure management needed to be a little bit different. Even though they thought that this wasn't necessarily affecting them directly right now, they did see benefits to their utility and to water utilities in general if runoff were reduced. Financial in part, where communities are doing things to treat the water that we wouldn't have to do if we didn't have the problems in it to start with, and better water. And then the other thing we talked about a little bit was, what's the role of the utility in this space? And half of the people we talked to said they have had conversations with farmers and others in agriculture about farming practices and runoff and ways to reduce that. And, and they said this had sort of heard different things back when they had these conversations, from the, very receptive, people have real good intentions, to, it has this financial impact on the farmers, and so it's hard to have these conversations. The people who haven't had these conversations with farmers gave different reasons why they haven't. There's a range of reasons. I'm busy, it's not directly affecting us. And then this other thing that came up, and we heard in different contexts as well, and a lot of the phone conversations that we had, this came up, sort of the political power of the agriculture industry and not wanting to cause conflict with, and often in these rural places too, it's not just political power, but it's your neighbors, right? So not wanting to cause conflict with folks who have taken different positions on this. So overall, just key takeaways there, I would say that we found a pretty high level awareness of the problem of runoff, some level of awareness of actions that could be taken to fix it, and some willingness to engage in conversations with the agricultural community about fixing it, with some hesitation around barriers like, how do we sort of fit in the time to do it, and how, what's the political and social ramifications of doing that. And I think we have a couple minutes, if Mary Beth, if you wanted to open it to questions.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you so much, Emma. That is really interesting. That's some perspective that we really don't hear very often. So really appreciate your work on that. And you may have mentioned this and I missed it, but do I remember correctly that there is a published resource from NWF that maybe touches on some of this, or does that relate more to kind of some work that they're doing with source water protection and outreach?
I don't think there's a published version of this.
Okay.
So, but I'd have to go back and check in with Adam about what they put out there.
Okay, that's totally fine. I just thought maybe there had been something out there. So are there any other questions for Emma? And while we are waiting for folks, because you can just go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can type a question into the chat. But while we're waiting for that for a couple seconds, I just want to invite you, Emma, and the other presenters this morning to go ahead and enter your contact information into the chat box. We did have a request from one of our participants to be able to reach out to some of you guys with some follow-up questions. So if everybody can do that, that would be great. And I'm not hearing any questions at the moment. So definitely feel free to reach out to Emma if something pops into your mind that you would like to know a little more about. And with that, thank you so much, Emma. Really appreciate you sharing this information with us this morning.
Hey, Mary Beth, I'll just tag in there and say that we will include with the post-meeting survey to all participants the YouTube links and then also contact information for the speakers. So it'll be a good email follow-up that we will put together.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next kind of item on our agenda is this pre-recorded interview between myself and Ruth. When I invited Ruth to come and speak this morning, she was super excited, but also super disappointed that she wasn't going to be able to make it because she's in the field. And so she did suggest that maybe we try this new kind of method, new for me, I should say. So what I'm going to do now is attempt to go meta and show a pre-recorded Zoom session in our currently being recorded Zoom session. So if you will bear with me for one moment.
Only suggestion I have is make sure you check the box for sharing video. Otherwise, it should be relatively okay. It'll be a little choppy maybe, but not
okay. If it's too bad, maybe, because actually, you know what, we are kind of running behind and I'm wondering
if we could
if maybe
send it out with the materials as well. I would say let's try to watch at least a little bit of it, if that's
okay. Sounds good. Let's start it off, and then we'll just kind of see how it goes because it is a little bit long, and I don't want to eat too far into our break. But here we go. All right, I think I got it. Share sound, video, sure.
Okay, I've given consent to being recorded.
Okay, excellent. Well, Ruth, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me this afternoon. You mentioned that you're unable to participate live in our SWCS fall meeting later this month because you have a prior commitment in the field on a project that I'm really excited to talk to you about in just a little bit. But before we jump into the exciting stuff talking about your projects, I was wondering if you could take a little time to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about the unique role of a conservation agronomist based out of an agricultural cooperative.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that project too. So we'll obviously get to it in a minute. But yeah, so my name is Ruth McCabe, and I work as a conservation agronomist, surprise, for Heartland Cooperative, which is an agricultural co-op located pretty much east to west across the central strip of Iowa. And we have, roughly 70 something locations around the state. And just for some background real fast, so an ag co-op, for those who are watching this who don't really have an understanding of what an ag co-op is, they are sort of the agricultural service providers of a farmer or even a landowner. So you don't have to be a farmer to go to an ag co-op. You can be a landowner too. But we sell everything from seed to fertilizer to pesticides, chemicals. We can do custom application or custom field management. So you name it, you need any kind of a rural ag land service provided, a co-op can do it for you. And some other comparable co-ops over in that area are like Lynn Co-op or Key Co-op are some common ones. IAS, if anybody's ever heard of them. There's also Nutrient Ag Solutions. They're not a traditional co-op, they're a business, but they still are an ag service provider. So any of those organizations. So, I work as a conservation agronomist, not a sales agronomist. So I don't sell products. what I sell is conservation, which seems sort of antithetical at the ag retail level, but actually a lot of ag retailers are getting on board with adopting conservation agronomists or creating sort of new conservation agronomy programs. And we can talk about that later. The long and the short of it is, you know, I have a background in physiology at Iowa State. Before that, I was at the University of Minnesota. I've worked as a technical agronomist. I've worked as a sales agronomist, but I also have a background in conservation. And so, you know, again, for people who are listening to this, if some people are listening to this and they're thinking, we need to get a conservation agronomist in whatever capacity, you know, you want to have somebody that has a hard agronomy background, but can also understand conservation topics and can meld the two and find a way to sell them both, or to help landowners who want to adopt conservation practices, to help them adjust their management plans to incorporate conservation practices. And the overarching goal of a conservation agronomist is bringing some ecosystem services back to a field where they might have been removed through conventional farming practices. So we don't necessarily want to erase farming completely. It's not economically feasible in many cases to do that anyway, but we at least want to try to return some ecosystem services to that environment, be it with cover crops or with a saturated buffer or with, you know, prairie strips, or wetland or you know, what have you. I hope that answers your question. It's kind of long-winded.
Got to unmute myself there. Yeah, no, that was a perfect description of what you do, Ruth. So, I mean, really, it sounds like you're very involved with working one-on-one with farmers and helping them make knowledgeable and conservation-minded decisions about their farming operations. So I was wondering if you could talk us through an example of the type of assistance that you're providing to farmers on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's everything under the sun. I partner with my sales agronomists in my region as much as I partner with my growers. So, I mean, I work very closely with my sales agronomists. Some of them see me as like a catch-all solution to questions that are off the wall and wild, which I love because it keeps me on my toes. Some of them just rely on me for specifically conservation-related things. It really depends on what the sales agronomist wants to do, but it's the same thing with growers. Some growers, once I've built a relationship with them, they will ask me about the craziest things, which is fun. Some growers, to them, I am just the cover crop lady, or I am just the edge of field lady, or the one thing they're working with me on is the one thing they'll talk to me about. So it really depends on the grower, but I provide assistance on everything from I've been out running behind a drill, measuring depth and making sure that seed is being placed appropriately. I have helped vacuum out, I don't even want to describe how many planters. You know, I have just provided over the phone assistance. If people, they don't need me much beyond that. I help people sign up for cost share programs, both state and federal cost share programs. You have to have an understanding of how all those programs interact. So yeah, to be a conservation agronomist means you have to understand a ton of programming. And again, you've got to have a good background in agronomy, and then you've got to be able to provide both technical boots on the ground assistance as well as just like theoretical paperwork assistance or programmatic assistance, helping people navigate programs. Honestly, in the winter, that's the biggest demand on my time is people who are like, I don't even know what I qualify for, but I want to do this thing. Can you help me find a program that'll support me? And then it's up to me to sort of like a social worker, right? Like I'm navigating programs and trying to figure out where there's funding and if, you know, and trying to help farmers, you know, growers or landowners line themselves up with programming. So it's a hodgepodge of services I provide, but it's fun. It's never the same. That's awesome. So how long have you been in your job? I was hired last August, actually, August of 2020, and it has been a whirlwind. It's been a whirlwind. I'm glad I was a sales agronomist in the past, I think. Mm-hmm. And I worked at the university level. I worked in extension for a while, and I worked in research. So I had the experience of building relationships because it was a ton of relationship building at first. It's how I got to know you. Mm-hmm. You know, to kind of learn about what programs were out there. It's been a crazy uphill learning experience, but it's good. It's been fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I totally get that about relationship building. That's definitely such a huge part of what we all do in conservation on a regular basis. Yeah. So over the past year, have you had any like successes that you're really excited about or anything you'd want to share with the group? Yeah, absolutely. I do a few. It's different in every county. So again, relationship building. You know, I would consider like decent, good buddies or colleagues, I should say, with some of the NRCS district conservationists in some counties. Some of the district conservationists are, you know, they give me answers or whatever, but, you know, we don't really get along, but some of them I really get along with. And with those folks, it's like, we have gotten some really cool partnerships on the ground. And so a couple of wins are, for instance, I have one grower, it's a grower family, they farm in 3 different counties. They were interested in maybe doing CSP. They wanted to up their game a little bit. They also happened to qualify for some of those recently funded RCPPs over in Western Iowa. And they didn't know, they didn't know what to apply for. And it was, you know, I worked with them and their district conservationists, and I said, hey, you know, would you guys be mad if they applied for more than one program? Like, is it okay to put in more than one application? And you know, keeping the lines of communication open, it was just encouraged that all, you know, everybody's on board, and it's like, we're going to fill out multiple applications, and hopefully you'll qualify for one of these programs. If you qualify for more than one, then you have to pick and choose, you know, what you're going to go with. But it was through like knowing those folks and understanding the programming that I was able to kind of line up these 4 options for this family that they can go after. And hopefully, statistically speaking, you know, they at least get one of them to help fund what they want to do. Another exciting win is I had a landowner further north who wanted to put in a pretty large prairie, and she was running into some friction at the county level with some of the conservation staff there. And so I was able to step in and, you know, do some negotiations and chat with more folks, because I happened to have built enough relationships across the conservation sector where I knew more people, and we were able to feel out what was going wrong. And in the end, her contract was approved, and she gets to put in this really big prairie, and she's so excited about it because she's retiring, and it's like her lifelong dream. And then, of course, there's all the work that, you know, Heartland is doing with, like, for instance, Polk County's saturated buffer blitz. You know, I've gotten to meet so many cool landowners through that program and helped them kind of walk through the process of getting an edge of field structure. So all of that I consider to be like really cool wins, you know, like it's all kind of different. Some of it seems like minor and some's a lot bigger, but at the end of the day, like, I'm making landowners and growers happy. So that's all wins.
Absolutely. Well, and it sounds to me like your job really provides the flexibility to meet growers kind of where they're at, wherever they're at in their process, in their operation. And that you're really able to help guide them to the resources that they need for meeting their conservation goals. And I was just kind of interested if you could talk a little bit about that and sort of your kind of targets or goals as a conservation agronomist, and kind of how that relates to you being able to do your job really effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So my position, as I said earlier, conservation agronomists are kind of mushrooming up all over the state. I'm not the only one. There's a bunch of us. And there's a couple different models. There's a few models out there for how conservation agronomists are funded. There are like independent agronomists. I'm sure you've heard his name. He works in Northeast Iowa, Jason Gomes. I think he works independently. He's like a contractor. He does a lot of great work. And then there's conservation agronomists who are technically employed by Iowa Soybean Association, but they partner with some local ag retailers. And then there's me and Michael. We're hired directly by Heartland, and so we work within Heartland. But we are partially funded by a grant as well, a federal grant. So all the conservation agronomists are in some way kind of partially funded by some kind of grant project by a different like entity that's funding their position. And then they're hired in some way to work with an ag co-op. In my circumstance, I have deliverables that are sort of demanded by the funding authority that's giving us money for our positions. And so those deliverables, super easy, they became our job goals, right? So we have this online dashboard that we keep, and we like track on a weekly basis what we've gotten done that week, how many saturated buffers we've gotten contracted, how many acres of cover crops that we've gotten contracted. And there's like a dashboard, and it looks like a sports, scoreboard. So it like encourages fun competition. For us, we're both type A, both me and Michael. So for us, it is fun competition. I know for some people that sounds like a nightmare, but for us, it's like, oh man, he's beating me this week, dang it. And that's kind of how we keep track of all that, is we just use the grant deliverables as our job goals. And so we have something like 50 edge of field structures. We're at like 43 right now. So I think we're going to knock that goal out of the park. We have something like 25,000 acres of cover crops or something. We're at like 13 or 14,000 acres right now. New cover crop adoption, not like continuous. So we're doing good on that one. And we have like so many thousands of acres of no-till adoption. And and some other, like maybe get one wetland. You know, I think we're going to knock, I think we got that wetland taken care of. We've got certain number of acres for prairie. So we have these goals, and you know, we work towards them when we keep track of them. So I think that answers your question there. And as for the other conservation agronomists, I think they have comparable goals. I don't know necessarily how they're working to track their stuff, but I think they're working with like Iowa soybean to keep track of those goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think especially because your positions seem to be fairly new, right? They've been popping up over the past couple of years, and the ability to track your success, I would think would be really beneficial for the individual co-op to just be able to say, hey, these guys are really effective. When somebody walks into our office and they want to know about cover crops, we don't have to send them away. We have somebody in-house who can really talk knowledgeably to producers about the practices.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. Okay, so I want to shift gears now because, as you know, the focus of today's conference is source water protection. And so much of what you're doing supports our goals for source water protection. So I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper. So as you know, there's really an important need out there to ensure that communities can continue to supply safe and reliable drinking water to their residents. And same thing like rural acreages, you know, private wells also have concerns with drinking water safety. So from where you sit as a conservation agronomist, do you have any advice for communities that might want to start a conversation with their agricultural neighbors about water quality?
Yeah, a ton of advice. Get a long conversation about this. Yes, absolutely. There's a huge role for conservation agronomists that they can play in encouraging source water protection. I'm all about water quality. You know, one of my taglines is like, if every day I can go home and go to bed knowing that I convinced another grower to try something new that improves water quality moving off of a field, then like that's a successful day. So if to engage, I know that the thing that makes me the most successful in my position in particular, because I've had folks say like, Ruth, you're really good at selling conservation. And I would argue to a certain degree that it's less about selling conservation and it's more, well, there's two parts of it, right? It's less selling conservation and it's more creating a compelling reason to try a new conservation related practice, right? But then also it's meeting somebody where they're at. So meeting a farmer or meeting a landowner, you said it earlier, meeting them at a table as a blank slate. So I don't, and it's hard to do this when you are a conservationist at heart. So I'll be clear about that. I would love to see the world, you know, covered in prairie strips with bees flying around and all kinds of, you know, practices installed at the field level everywhere that provides all these ecosystem services. You know, I could go on and on, but not everybody is there yet. And so when I come to a table with a grower or a landowner, I absolutely have to meet them where they're at. And like any judgment at all, any thoughts or preconceived notions about what you want to see that person do, it can't come out of your mouth. It can't be on your face. You have to meet that person and it has to be all about them. That conversation has to be about them and their land goals and what they want to do and what their hopes and dreams are about the future for that land. If they've even expressed interest about meeting with you, it means they're interested in trying something. And at that point, it's up to you to ferret out where their comfort zone is and what they want to try. So that's like my first part of that is sitting at the table and meeting a grower where they're at, and then celebrating like, where are they at? If they're using variable rate nutrient application, I know it's minor, but that's a conservation practice. Celebrate that, be excited about that because they could not be doing that, right? If they're doing no-till, but they're not using cover crops, that's still a win, right? Like that's no-till, like that's fantastic, celebrate that. And like starting at that level or whatever level they're at is super important. And then the other advice, you know, that I would have to give is that have a really good understanding of all the options that are available to a landowner in a county or in a watershed or in the state. Be empowered when you meet with somebody to say, you know, there's all of these programs that you could potentially, you know, like I know for a fact that in this area, there's these 3 programs. Have you considered, you know, do you want to try this? You mentioned to me a minute ago, you're interested in trying, you know, cover crop. There's this program that'll pretty much pay you $40 an acre to do that, you know, or whatever. And having that as like your ace up your sleeve. So after you have this like opening conversation, that's really meeting them where they're at and expressing a genuine interest in trying to work with them and a curiosity about what they'd be interested in trying, then you could pitch like, oh yeah, there's this thing you could try and I know about it and this is it. Maybe it doesn't happen all in the same meeting, right? Like maybe the first meeting is just you meeting with your neighbor and saying, hey, so I'm just got voted into this conservation board or whatever it is that you're volunteering for, right? Or what you're doing. Hey, I just got this new job. I got this new position and I'm focusing on source water protection. And you're a landowner, you're my neighbor. I wanted to get your thoughts and opinions about this. Like, what would you be interested in trying? What are you, I don't know. I'm trying to learn. You tell me what you'd be interested in trying. Sometimes landowners and growers really respond well to that. And they can give you some of their ideas. And that's when you can, like, the next time you meet, be like, oh yeah, hey, we talked about this and here's this program, you'd be a perfect fit for it. So those two things have really helped me like sell programming. I don't consider it selling. It's more like discovering what their thoughts and dreams and hopes are for their land and then offering them a thought or a hope or a dream that they didn't know they could have access to.
Well, and honestly, like, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of relationship building. It takes a little time. I don't think you're going to change a producer's mind in the first time you meet them, but when you get to know them and understand kind of where they're at and understanding what their hopes and dreams are, and maybe adding to that vision for their land, that seems really important.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you really believe there's a role for conservation agronomists to play in source water protection efforts in Iowa. And I think you have done a lot in terms of helping to develop new partnerships and sort of creatively address some of the challenges that we face here in Iowa. So I wanted to circle back to what we were talking about right at the beginning of our conversation, some of the cool projects that you have going on. And you kind of touched on them briefly a little bit, but I was hoping you could kind of share a little bit more about what your role is in some of the new partnerships in your area.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So there's a ton of partnerships that we're launching. So there's two big ones. There's one where we've worked with a couple of municipalities and a utility company in central Iowa. The ink hasn't dried on the contracts yet, so I want to be, not specific, but you can figure it out. Where we've partnered with these organizations to get this Hagee, Montag, Fortifier, cover crop cedar sprayer machinery on the landscape. We target some watersheds of interest to those munis and that utility company with this machinery for like an 8-week period in the fall, where we just blitz on cover crops and we go nuts. We've built an internal marketing program for that machine, and then we just go out and just hammer those watersheds with cover crops. And in exchange for doing that, then we get to use that machine earlier in the year for things like, anything that's related to conservation, split nitrogen application, variable rate fertilizer application, those kinds of things. So we use it as a conservation machine and it can be used all year long, which is exciting. But we specifically use it to target these watersheds. And we call it the Urban Ag Seeding Partnership, Urban Ag Seeding Partnership. Oh man, it's so great. I love puns. I didn't make that one up, my boss did. So yeah, that's one, and that will be, I'm sure, announced with great fanfare later this fall once the ink on all the contracts is dried and people can take credit for it, which is great. But the other project that we're working on that's big was not our brainchild, but it is the Polk County Saturated Buffer Blitz, which Heartland is a partner on. And the role we play in that is agronomic, purely agronomic in nature. So we are sort of the cred, the street cred for any of the farmers or the landowners that might be skeptical of like a county folk or a state person knocking on their door saying, hey, let us improve your land for you. We are kind of the intermediaries. So I've made a lot of phone calls, have had many cups of coffee. It's really cool, actually. The Polk County people will tell you that it's been fantastic to have agronomists on board who work for an entity not related at all to the public sector. Interesting, and sometimes I think kind of ironic that people will happily open their doors and chat with me from Heartland Co-op, but they're more skeptical of somebody from the state or the county, which is funny because I'm not a sales agronomist, but it's like, that's kind of funny, but it works. And so it's a partnership made in heaven, right? Because we can get into places sometimes that the county and the state hasn't been able to. And so it's been a good partnership. And it's been fun for us because it's helped us fulfill our edge of field goals that we had for our positions. But I also have learned a ton about getting in edge of field structures. So it was a wonderful training opportunity for me when I got this job a year ago. Like I knew what a saturated buffer was, but if you'd asked me, like if you put me in the middle of a field a year ago and said, do you think this would qualify for an inch of field structure, I probably would have stared at you blankly. Now I can definitely do that assessment after working with Polk County. So it's been a win-win for everybody all the way around. And we're hoping to do that. We're going to partner with Polk County again next year on this project, and we're hoping to partner with whatever is potentially getting planned in the Cedar watershed as well. You know, if there's a blitz that ends up happening in eastern Iowa, I would be all over that, because it is, now that I know how to do it, it's a lot of fun.
Yes, we are very excited. And as Ruth alluded to, there is some of us in the Cedar River watershed who are looking to replicate the model that has been started over in central Iowa. So Clark Porter in Black Hawk County, he's an IDOLS watershed coordinator, and he's been doing a lot to kind of spearhead this effort. So we're very excited about that, and more to come on that project.
Say, I hope it's okay that I just revealed that. Am I in trouble?
Nope.
I might have just outed you guys on
Not at all. Like you said, kind of the paperwork is in the works, and so we're not quite sure how that's going to shake out, but it is something that we're really committed to making happen because of the success that you guys are having in central Iowa with that. And I just want to say, like, I've heard firsthand from other partners on the projects that you've been involved with, Ruth, that having you know, as a conservation agronomist on board really has helped to recruit growers that otherwise probably would never have participated. So I think that really speaks volumes for the important role that you're playing in your work. So thank you for all that you're doing. And thank you also for kind of shining the light on the work that you're doing and how communities might be able to partner with someone in your position in the future. And that really does kind of bring us to the end of our session. I wish we had a lot more time because I've got way more questions to ask you. But I really do appreciate your time. I know you're busy, and I want to make sure that people have your contact information. So what I'm going to be doing is typing your contact info into the chat box so folks can have it. So I'll circle back with you on that. But again, thank you so much for your time, and I really enjoyed hearing about what you do.
Yep. Thank you so much. I'm happy to spread the message and share the love. So.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much. Bye.
Yep. Thank you.